My name is Jessica Ball. I am currently a volcanologist at the California Volcano Observatory, which is part of the USGS. And when I came to the USGS, started as a Mendenhall postdoc, or part of the Mendenhall Postdoctoral Research Fellowship Program. So the program is a way to involve people who have just graduated or about to graduate with a PhD in USGS research. It provides a research experience with scientists at the USGS and then access to survey facilities and field areas. And it does position the fellow favorably for a future USGS hire, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. We are a government agency, and as a result of various restrictions on hiring, it can be difficult to get people installed in the USGS directly, even from a fellowship program like this. I believe the success rate is 1 in 5 fellows in recent years. But when you are installed as a USGS fellow, it is actually a full government position with a GS-12 salary, which gives you a salary based on your location. And this lasts for 2 years, but can be extended up to 2 more years if you or your research advisors have funding to extend it. The research opportunities cover a broad range of anything that's done at the USGS, not just including geology. We have biology, climate science, all sorts of other areas. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. Unlike the NSF GRFP, it's no longer conducted on any particular schedule. So a project for the Mendenhall Fellowship goes through a review process before it's approved for funding, and then is posted based on the ideal timing for that particular project. And you can see in the picture here that the closing dates for these projects are scattered all over the place. I can say that typically it's a few months of review before you'll know whether or not an application has been successful. But again, it depends on the review panel and how quickly we're able to get it through HR. Some of the basic requirements for this, because it's a government position, it has to be given to a US citizen, either born or naturalized. There are extremely few exceptions for non-citizens, unfortunately. There have been maybe 1 or 2 in the past, but those were circumstances that required a lot of extra work. And the other requirement for this is that the PhD has to be awarded no earlier than 5 years from the opening date of the application, or it has to be completed when the employment starts. So basically, you should be nearing the end of your PhD when you think about applying for one of these. And all of these applications are handled through USA Jobs, which some of you may be familiar with as the government's job application system. It's a little bit clunky, but it helps in that you can standardize things like your CVs and then use them again later. So when you're applying for a Mendenhall Fellowship, you're really applying for a specific research project like you would with any other postdoc. So you want to choose a project that's closely aligned with both your skills and your goals. And the advantage you have with a Mendenhall application is that you are allowed to contact the individual sponsors of the application, and they can help you develop the research proposal and give you other guidance on how to write a good application. It's a little unusual for research funding. It's not quite like a usual grant proposal, but this can be really helpful. When I applied, I had been in contact with my sponsors since the previous winter, and I submitted my application in September after a number of rounds of review with the people who are running that particular research project, and that helped immensely. So for one of these applications, in addition to a CV and sort of basic information that you might submit with any job, you'll be submitting a research proposal. And this is really a formal research proposal. One of the main goals is that you are not only talking about your research objectives as they apply to that particular project, but you're also trying to emphasize how this project will serve the USGS science program strategy. And in the USGS, we have a number of mission areas. Mine, for example, is natural hazards mission area. And we have specific mandates from Congress about what we are to do with our agency's funding. For natural hazards, which is one that many geology people fall under, it's to monitor and research natural hazards in the US so that we can help protect people, property, and infrastructure. So it's very applied. Another aspect of your research objective is how and where the research is to be conducted. So you should have a pretty good idea of the methods that you'd like to use for whatever project you're applying for. Obviously, the research advisors will be listed. And another thing you'll want to do is look into the particular scientific facilities that you might want to use that the USGS has. Not only do we have a lot of internal lab facilities and testing grounds and other things like that, but we have partnerships with many universities depending on our locations. And that gives us access to a lot of really amazing laboratories and instruments and methods we can use. Another thing that you'll be doing in this application is developing a budget, and I highly recommend getting help from the research advisors on this. It's a pretty simple budget, but it's practice for what you would do as a government employee when you are submitting a project budget for research that you're going to be doing as part of your job. It includes things like travel expenses and equipment and software costs and things like that. You'll obviously want to have references, and what was talked about for the NSF references basically applies here. Ideally, you'll want to be getting your reference letters from somebody who knows you as a researcher or knows you as a worker, so that you could give the review board a good picture of how you'll fit in at the USGS. And then there's the usual list of required documents like a CV, transcripts, lists of publications. Because this is a government position, there's also veterans preference, which means that if you are a veteran or you're currently serving in the military, then you have a leg up on some of the other applicants in the way that our HR people score the different applications. So HR gets them first, and then they go to the science review board. And another thing that you'll have to be prepared for is a background check, because this is a government position. This is something that doesn't happen with the NSF fellowship. But this is a government job, and so you'll have to go through a pretty basic level of background check, most of which can be fulfilled by having forms sent out to your character references. So to give you an idea of what a successful application looks like, I've already mentioned that you want to make sure you address USGS scientific needs as they're described in the research opportunity. And one way of doing this is to pull out keywords and phrases from the description of the project, and make sure you talk about those in your proposal and in your CV. You want to be succinct and give the most concrete plans that you can come up with. It's a pretty short research proposal. It's obviously not on the level of an NSF one. But also, like an NSF one, you want to discuss the big picture. Why is this research going to benefit the USGS and the society? Again, you don't want to apply without coordinating this application with the research advisors. That's a big advantage for you, and you definitely shouldn't pass it up. Just sort of a logistical concern, USC Jobs can be an annoying platform to have to deal with. There are really detailed instructions on the website for the Mendenhall fellowships, and you'll want to follow those to the letter. And check the website for updates on the status, because that's how they'll be communicated. And the last thing I would recommend is that you consider very carefully where the project is located and that you can afford to move there, because moving expenses are not included with your relocation for one of these fellowships. And that can get quite expensive, and you want to be sure that you're going to enjoy spending time where you are and that you can afford it ahead of time. So I'll stop there, and the website for the Mendenhall fellowships is up on the screen. There's an FAQ, and there's lots of information about how to apply and pitfalls to avoid there.
Great, thanks, Jessica.
Yep.
We'll take a couple questions here. One question that we have has to do with, can the research projects involve partnering with state and local government agencies?
Yes, they absolutely can involve partnering. We actually also partner with universities in some cases, but one of the main things that we do in the natural hazards group, for example, is work with our state and local partners on the research that we do, because they're going to benefit from it. So I think that would be an excellent use of the project application.
Great, thank you. And also, does the research proposal have to align with the advisor's research, or can it just align with the USGS science strategy? So say you wanted to do something a little different, is that okay? Or do you really have to stay bound by the advisor's interests?
Right. That's a great question. So because it's a postdoc, it's sort of your first foray into really being an independent researcher. So your research advisors can guide your work, but you really want to make it your own. Take your skill set and your interests and look at their research proposal and see how you could fit into that generally, but put your own stamp on it. So yes, it definitely encourages you to be an independent researcher.